My children asked about my will before they asked about my pain. That is the sentence I never thought I would say at 85 years old. My name is Eleanor Whitaker, and 3 weeks ago I came home from Mercy General with a hospital bracelet still cutting into my wrist. I had spent 4 nights there after a bad fall in my kitchen. Nothing broken, thank God, but my blood pressure dropped. My hip bruised purple, and for 2 days every nurse looked at me like I was one wrong step from not going home. When my daughter Karen opened my front door, I felt relief. My son Michael followed with his wife. Paul came last, holding his phone like it mattered more than the woman in the chair. I sat under a blanket in the living room, wearing Ruth's blue sweater. My hands shook when I lifted my tea. Karen looked around the room, then said, "Mom, have you updated your will recently?" Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Did the doctor change your medicine?" Not, "Are you scared sleeping alone tonight?" The will. For a moment I thought I misheard her. Then Michael cleared his throat and said, "We just need to know where things stand." Where things stand. I looked down at my swollen wrist and understood. My fall had not reminded them that I was alive. It had reminded them that I could die. I raised 3 children in that house. Their father, Robert, died when Paul was 16, and I went back to work at the county library because the mortgage did not care that I was heartbroken. I packed lunches before sunrise. I sewed Halloween costumes after closing shift. I paid for braces, used cars, college applications, and one very expensive wedding I could barely afford. Whenever they needed me, I found a way. When Karen's first baby came early, I slept on her couch for 6 weeks and washed bottles until my fingers cracked. When Michael lost his job, I paid his rent and told him it was a loan, though we both knew it was love. When Paul divorced, I let him and his 2 boys move into my guest room, even after he left towels on the floor like he was 14 again. I never wanted my children to feel unsafe. That was my mistake. I made safety look easy, so they forgot what it really cost me. The house was paid off because I skipped vacations for 30 years. The savings existed because I wore coats past their season and cooked at home when friends went out. The little life insurance policy, the bank account, the old Toyota, the silver wedding ring in my drawer, none of it appeared by magic. It came from my life. But sitting in that living room, listening to them talk about planning ahead, I realized they were already placing labels on pieces of me. The first warning came in the hospital. I woke up the second afternoon with my mouth dry and the curtain half open. My children stood near the door whispering. Karen had a folder. Michael said, "If the house goes through probate, that could take forever." Paul said, "Someone needs access to her accounts in case bills come up." Karen answered, "We should get power of attorney while she's still clear." While she's still clear. I kept my eyes closed. That was the first time in my life I pretended to sleep so I would not have to hear my own children finish a sentence. Maybe they were scared. I have tried to be fair about that. Fear makes people practical. Hospitals make everyone think of paperwork. But fear also reveals what people reach for first. My children reached for documents. Ruth reached for my hand. Ruth is my neighbor, 78, widowed, sharp as a sewing needle, and too honest for most people's comfort. She was the one who found me after I fell. She heard me knocking on the wall with a wooden spoon and called 911. She stayed until the ambulance left. She fed my cat. She brought my sweater to the hospital because she knew I hated thin hospital gowns. When I came home, Ruth came every morning. She did not ask what she was getting. She brought chicken soup in a glass jar, changed my sheets, wrote down my pill schedule, and drove me to my follow-up appointment in her dusty Buick. She watered my African violets. She sat with me through the long, quiet hour before bedtime when fear gets loudest. One evening after Karen called to ask whether I kept important papers in the desk or the bedroom closet, Ruth watched my face change. She said, "Eleanor, love is not what people call themselves. Love is what they do when you are weak." I wanted to defend my children. A mother's first instinct is always defense. But my mouth opened and nothing came out. 2 days later, Michael came over with a printed checklist. He called it being organized. It had sections for bank accounts, passwords, insurance, property, jewelry, funeral preferences. I said, "Michael, I am still here." He looked embarrassed, then annoyed. "Mom, don't make this emotional." That was when something inside me went quiet. Not angry, quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives when your heart stops arguing with the truth. The next morning I asked Ruth to drive me downtown. I put on lipstick, my good gray coat, and Robert's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. At the attorney's office, a young woman named Ms. Bell listened without interrupting. She reviewed my old will, the one that left everything equally to my 3 children. Then she asked, "What would you like to change?" I thought of Karen's folder, Michael's checklist, Paul looking at his phone. Then I thought of Ruth carrying soup through the rain. I changed it. Not because I stopped loving my children. I will love them until my last breath. That is the terrible beauty of motherhood. Love stays, even when trust leaves. But love does not have to be blind on paper. I left each child a modest amount, enough to show I remembered they were mine. I left Ruth the Toyota, my violets, and the money I had set aside for emergencies, because she had been my emergency and my rescue. The rest will go to a local senior support fund that helps old people stay safely in their homes. When I signed, my hand shook. Miss Bell asked if I needed a moment. I said no, I needed this moment 85 years to arrive. My children do not know yet. Someday they will open an envelope and be shocked by what they find. They may call me bitter. They may say Ruth influenced me. They may say a mother should give everything to her children. But I know the truth. They asked about my will before they asked about my pain. So I made sure my final gift went to the people who remembered I was still alive. If your children cared more about your inheritance than your health, would you still leave them everything?